First order of business is the approval of the minutes from May. So I have a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes from May. Charlie?
Has to be you. I think it's you.
Yeah, that's all over the moment. Okay, second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
I do have one question about the minutes. The question that Mitch had asked about making the, Director Wingo had asked about making the elementary gyms open, available to the public. Do we have any updates on that? That was way back in May, so.
I don't have an update.
I was gonna say, I don't think we have an update, but we will work on it this fall about access, yeah. It was, we talked about it more for the winter, right?
Yeah,
The
winter time.
compressed, yeah. I think we just need to go back and look at our notes. I think we might even moved on something with that last spring, but
Okay.
we can revisit that one for sure,
Okay,
yep.
sounds good. All right, so moving on to the London series.
Sure.
Okay.
So there really aren't any significant updates from us. Actually, zero updates. The only one we found was the changing of one of the names of one of the directors. But beyond that, there were no updates from us on these policies. So if there are questions or anything from the board, we're happy to chat through them. But I think this is the third or fourth time we've done this annually. So hopefully we have them pretty dialed in.
Right. Does anyone have any questions about the London series?
It's more just genuinely curious question, curiosity. 104, the anti-bullying, anti-harassment type of that one. That applies to all personnel, whether it's staff, teachers, administrators. Does it go all the way up to the board as well?
Without looking at these, I would say yes. I believe our policies talk about just anybody associated in the district community, and as the governing board of the corporation, I would say that would apply.
No, like, from school volunteers and
Did
stuff. Shall not
It's
be
just
bullying or
the
harassment
bullying.
while on
I'm
school
sorry.
property.
So,
So I would say yes.
Eliza, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
And all volunteers, yeah.
That was an example I was thinking of because we've had issues with the volunteer, for example, before. And
We
Yeah,
tried to
it
just
didn't
take a
include-
very, sorry, to cut you off.
You're
We tried
fine.
to take a very broad approach to make sure everyone feels welcomed and that they can report anything on it. So that's why last year, Director Lingo, we added, this team added the 107 as a kind of a general complaint process and appeal process, because we had a couple that were specific to bullying and harassment. We didn't have one that was more general about if you have a concern, how you work that through the system, and again, trying to be as inclusive and to capture all that we could. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
I don't really have any questions.
I was just noticing that with the policies that are included in the agenda back here, 102G.1, applying to LGBTQ guidelines, there's a note that policy is under review. Can you just remind me where we stand with that review?
Is that tied to the
But can you repeat which one?
I would say one-
It's the LGBTQ.
G1.
No,
Oh,
under
it's-
series.
My guess is it's gonna be tied to some of the ongoing court case that we've had, Charlie, and so that's why it was listed as under review, and so as that legal proceeding gets sorted out, we'll be able to solidify what needs to be in that policy.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that why there's no page for it?
Correct.
Okay, we're ready to move on to policy primers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So when we look at the policy primers, the couple of notes as we begin. First, Title IX, those we're not ready to bring those new policies forward because there's been a delay in the implementation of the new amendments. And so those just still sit as something will come back to P&G when we have new guidance, which means the 2020 updates are still in place. We sent a team, Nick, Eric, and Lindsay Dutcher from HR. They went to an all-day conference put on with all others, and so we're up to date, we're in compliance with the law as it currently stands, but they thought they were moving a new edition forward, and then it kind of got held up in court. And so while there's some language in the policy parameters about Title IX, there's no action on those tonight. The first one that we'd like to talk a little bit about with the board or with the committee is 402.3 of use of students by school district employees. When we met several weeks ago, Director Easton made a comment about, or had a question, not a question and comment about the new language, and that it didn't talk about intent, it strict intent, and replaced it with grooming. When they made the updates to this policy, the legislature actually had two other bills that were associated with this. I'll pass a copy of one of them around. There's more than we need there. But so first was House File 2602, which created a new section of Iowa Code that is grooming, and it defines grooming. And you see there in the first line, a person knowingly performs. And so it talks about that intent piece covered right there in that language. Director Easton, I think it's still a great point, because what we don't see in 402.3 in the model policy we got is any reference to that being defined. And so if the board wanted to either call that out specifically in the policy, we could work on language to add it in that sentence. Or, and Brady and I had a conversation about this even just before we came in, usually at the bottom of policies, and this one is no different, it says legal references. For some reason, ISB didn't include 709.8A. I assume it's probably because it's a new code section. It's listed in all the policy updates that we've gotten from the DE or others as something relevant to this reporting. It just didn't get captured there. So two options, either just referencing, adding it to those Iowa code references at the bottom, or specifically mentioning it in the top, or ways that we could draw attention to this code if we thought that that was necessary. But we know that that's what the state is intending, because in addition to House File 2602, they also passed House File 2487, which changed the language in the BOEE's Code of Responsibilities for Certified Employees to language that more mirrors this that's in our policy. And so they took out some of their general language, added grooming in there too, and so we're seeing that consistently from the state in some of these updates. And so it's not only going to be in our policies, that same vernacular is being used now by the Board of Educational Examiners in terms of what would be a mandatory report to the BOE should we come across grooming from it. That was a lot of background. And then back to the question is, do we feel like we need to add any language to it that would clarify?
I know as I was reading through that, I was wondering, how do you define grooming? Because it could be subjective, so I would prefer that we add it in.
I can second that.
I would agree too. Wish Lisa was here. This adds intent. I can't do language.
But she likes a good law, so.
We can ask her at the board meeting.
We can note that in the minutes. So we'll work on.
Add that in. Yeah.
Some language to add, and so next time we bring these back to you, you'll see that in there, just probably a reference inside the language of the policy. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say employee perspective, thanks. That was a good catch, good to dig a little bit deeper on that one, find the statutory changes that have been made. I think the reference would be really good, so thank you.
The other big piece that we'd like to spend some time talking with you about this evening are the policies around compulsory attendance and also chronic absenteeism. The one we'd like to focus on this evening is 501.3 compulsory attendance. 501.9 I'm going to reference in this conversation, but what we'd really like to do is talk with the board about coming back at our meeting in September and having a work session to talk more fully about what our approach is gonna be to chronic absenteeism. I'm sure you might have received questions. You saw us put a note out the middle of last week about attendance. That's generated some questions for us. Part of the difficulty is that we received additional guidance from the state at the beginning of last week or the Friday or Thursday before, so still trying to work through that. There's some local decisions that we need to make, and so we just kind of pressed for time on that. So our preference would really be tonight to try to maybe zero in on some language for 501.3, but then come back and have a broader, deeper conversation with the board on chronic absenteeism overall.
Yeah, thanks, Chase. I sent you guys a document last night that's really a technical assistance document from the Department of Ed that we're kind of working through on a team. The thing I'd just draw your attention to prior to that work session is there's 5 areas that says it can be locally determined. And then we get into then on page 2, if you read closely, it talks about the difference between what counts against a school or school district's chronic absenteeism numbers and what counts for student level consequences, or really family level consequences. And those local ones can still impact a student, but either way, they're going to count as absences for a district's chronic absenteeism number. So the student is either absent or present from school. They've gotten rid of unexcused versus excused. So they're either absent or they're not. And then we need to determine from there, are we exempting students or not exempting students from some of those consequences? And some of those you can tell are probably easier to decide on than others in that category of 5. And there's compelling arguments probably on both sides for some of those, but that's what we want to spend some time talking to you guys about. When we got that information, I think it caused us to rethink some of the initial steps we thought we would take, knowing that there is a difference in how that's going to be handled, and then also just, of course, a tracking, reporting, logistical consideration for the district to be able to follow through on those. So again, nothing to do on it tonight. We're going to, in the interim, we're not sending letters to families. We'd already be sending letters tomorrow based on some of those percentages and reporting periods, and you can imagine some of the emails I got after we sent that out, let alone before we start sending a letter with some strong verbiage to families, whether it would truly impact them or they would be at risk of those consequences or not. It's just a culture killer. I've been writing, part of attendance letters for like 15 to 20 years, and there's no way to author them that alleviates or lowers the temperature as hard as you try on it. So we are going to come back, and we'll have to do some additional communication with our families too. So that's a long ways around saying we're going to have to spend some more time with you on it other than this evening. But any questions you have right now, I'd be happy to try to address, but otherwise I know Chase wants to get 501.3, right, as compulsory attendance.
But I was actually going to add a little bit more of what Matt talked about, the need to start sending letters. We've sent letters, attendance letters, for last year, centralized. This was not the first time we've done that.
For a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Centralized
process.
centralized the process, right? The other change of why the first part that Matt talked about is that last year was cumulative across the entire year. And so if we sent a letter at 10%, you had to miss 17 days of school. That would be 10%. Well, now it's by grading period, and so 10% could be as little as 4.5 days at the middle school. So you take your kids out for a week here in the first quarter or any quarter, and all of a sudden you're getting a letter that says you've missed 10% of school. And so I think that's the other part of it that's ratcheted up, but that's when Matt talks about letters could be going out as early as today, because you missed 3 days, you've missed 5% of the trimester. And so you get,
Or if they have COVID.
yes,
Yeah.
Are we
right.
at all concerned about kids showing up febrile and infectious?
And that's what we're trying, that's, I think, some of the guidance we're trying to
Yeah, I think we're
decipher.
concerned about all of the above, though, to be honest, right? I mean, like, again, vomiting, fever, all those things that you maybe wouldn't see a doctor for or get a note.
Yeah.
And so that's what we need to work through, like, okay, how could we mirror some of our past practice where there may be a certain number of absences where you don't require a note, and then after that, when, maybe you've exhausted those, we do require a note. That's still unpopular with families, but we've navigated that environment for a long time with them. But in the state's an easy punching bag sometimes for us on different issues, but this is also part of their ESSA accountability plan to the federal government. And so, some of that absenteeism stuff they do have to have worked into that plan. I think we'd probably disagree about the percentage, of the weight that they're doing that to kind of rank and sort us, but it's whatever we come up with will still be a little bit of a culture hit to some families for sure.
So this alert resets every trimester then?
For grading period.
Quarters.
For
It's different.
He asked about resetting, yeah.
Yeah. And- Yeah. Are we doing, is there any sort of checkup for the longitudinal people that are missing, that miss like 3 days every quarter?
You mean like a cumulative account
Yeah,
over
the
the,
cumulative count, where we're checking in on that as well, or?
I think right now we're focused on what do we do with the first grading period, but of course, I mean, as we've always looked at a longitudinal, we'll continue to look at students that way too, that you've accumulated, you know, a certain percentage as you go throughout the year, for sure.
It gets pretty complicated, you know, if you start requiring doctor's excuse and people that don't have, you know, primary health care provider. I don't mind the excused and unexcused being lumped together, because we used to have kids whose parents would call them in,
Yeah.
and other kids whose parents could or would, you know, didn't call
Right.
them in. So that part doesn't bother me as much. But I don't know. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter if it bothers me because it's a state law. So. But, you know, it's just complicated to try to implement this.
Well, when you look at those 5 local ones, Molly, they're
Yeah.
kind of articulating the difference, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it might be easier for us all to get around saying, well, we are gonna exempt one with a note, but just a family excusal, we're not, right? And then, you know, how do people feel about that, right? I mean, you know, you've been on both sides of it, right? So you
Right.
kind of understand some of the feedback we get, but.
Right.
Where did you set, which part of these tables is the stuff that applies against the district, and which ones are the ones that apply against the? Because I know that part of the revamp to the school ratings from the Every Student Succeeds Act that the state wants to put down will have some sort of percentage tied to our school buildings. Overall ratings will be based upon chronic absenteeism.
So the way as superintendents, we've been trying to decipher this, if you look on page 2,
Yeah.
and sorry, I'm not sure if this is answering all your questions
No,
there, Director
well,
Lingo,
I
but,
think we're all learning right now.
Yeah.
So,
and again, we don't want you to get too caught
yeah.
in the weeds here tonight on this part, but the way we've tried to differentiate it is really on page 2, they talk about with the continuation of ESSA accountability and the new state requirements, the following attendance decisions are made. The student's either absent or present, and you can go back to the page 1 definition, just look on the first page, and that seems pretty clear, right? They're in the building or they're not. And then 2, if it's absent, if the absence is exempt, then we have to make a determination, is the absence exempt from student level consequences? And then, if you go down further, you see all of the different reasons,
Yeah.
and you can tell that it's either a yes, no, or local. And so the local are the ones that we need to decide on. That, okay, are we going to exempt those out of student level consequences, knowing that they're still absent? They're still going to count against truancy numbers for the district because the kid's not in the building, right? But then we have local discretion on those 5 pieces. And that's page, what is that page?
Table 3,
Table 3, thank you.
page 3 and page 4.
Yeah. So you're basically talking about absent parent says family reasons, absent parent excused with reason given, planned medical treatment, medical appointment, home ill, parent or sibling emergency. So that's what our admin team will work to try to make some recommendations to you on about how we think we should handle and treat those. But I told the team I'd want you guys prepared for how we handled those, because eventually we know, right? They'll be
Yeah.
frustrated with us, and then once they're, you know, not happy with our answer, they'll contact you guys about how we're handling that. So
Thank you.
There's a number of complicating factors that we,
Yeah.
you know, like, and Molly talked about a note, but what do you do with the student that misses 7th period every day, but they're there the rest? How do you track that, to your point about that longitudinal? Add to it, we track, Adam, Josh, come out. We track absences for students by class period or by minute. The way the state tracks it for chronic absenteeism is by half day or full day. And so it's even a different way of calculating it. So if we were trying to show you data about our absenteeism rate, we'll have to talk about, okay, do you want the state report or do you want the local report? Because those numbers actually could be different. Correct?
They are different.
They are different. They are different. Yeah.
Well, the public's going to see the state
What'd you say,
I
Charlie?
say the public's going to see the statement.
Yeah.
I think I've raised this question before. If a student gets to the point, or a point of being referred to the district attorney for chronic absenteeism, I think, as I understand it, the district attorney is undergoing a process of revising how she handles those references. Is that going to make a difference in who you approve under these policies?
Well, so there's I believe, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong because we've all looked at this, but there's a may be referred at one level and then there is a shall be referred at another level with these. The other issue with this that, you know, to say the quiet thing out loud is that the capacity of the county attorney's office or ourselves to make all of those referrals and process those is extremely limited, right? That was the challenge with having this legislation passed, that it's not like Rachel's office has gotten bigger to handle more truancy issues. So
I think she did have a position.
yeah, but even so, I mean, like if we start referring all of these that may be, you know, after a 10% or whatever that number is, they still wouldn't have the capacity to do that. And then obviously we're going to make some sensitive decisions about the cases we would decide to refer that way or not. That's not going to make parents feel any better, like I'm saying, when that's still listed in the letter as a possibility. But then there is a time where, okay, a certain number of absences where it shall be referred. And I didn't misspeak there, right?
No,
I mean, that's
yeah,
the
your
same
specific
reading,
question
right?
is,
Yeah.
no, it won't impact what the board needs to implement because the law tells us, as Matt just said, that it gives us that language about at 10%. They use refer. We think it's more just inform, and then at 15%, if they haven't entered into a attendance plan or utilize that plan, then Rachel's office has the discretion about whether or not they want to look at some sort of legal action. And
So that's the county attorney's discretion at that point.
yes, I mean, we have to make the referral, and we're trying to work with them on that in a way to support the students and the families. But our requirement is to refer, not necessarily to make a recommendation or to make sure that the county attorney follows up. We just have to make provide them that information.
But after a student is referred to the county attorney's office, does that mean that we can't, we don't have any control at all about what to?
We would still be part of the conversation, but it would ultimately be the county attorney's discretion on if that family is charged or not charged. And we did she came and did a presentation to you guys, I think at the beginning of last year, right, about how they try to handle those and then how they drop the charge if some things are completed. But that's ultimately, yeah, her office's discretion.
So in the interest of time, we have to wrap it up here because we have a closed session at 5:30. What are we approving tonight?
Right, good,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Yeah. So we talked about this, I think, at our 2 meetings ago. Director Lingo caught some language in 501.3 that really doesn't match with practices that any district does. And as we shared, 501.3 was revised when the state allowed districts to start counting time either by minutes or by days. That was really the purpose. But they've added in these consequences for students not doing that. Well, as it read, as you see there, that they have to attend school a minimum of 1,080 hours. That's just what our school year is. And so really it would basically capture every single student that missed any time if we used all the additional hours that we have for inclement weather. So what we're suggesting is that we add language, and there's two choices there in green. We strike what they have in red, and we either insert that this would apply to students as stated in board policy 501.9. That's the conversation we want to come back to about chronic absenteeism, how we're defining it, and then it really lays out as it's trying to get to when they would be referred to the county attorney. Or we could be more specific and say students missing more than 10% of instruction hours, because what 501.9 is going to lay out in part is what we shared with our families, is that referral happens at the 10% mark for students. And so it's whether or not the board just wants to have a policy reference in there, which my recommendation would be that we do that, and my rationale on that is if we're going to make changes, then we only make changes in one place. When we have information in duplicated places throughout our policies, we sometimes miss it, and then we end up contradicting ourselves. But if we just reference it in a policy, then we know that's where we're going to, people should look for what those guidance are. But they both work, actually, knowing that 501.9 is in there, as I said a couple weeks ago, you could strike the red and add nothing, and, well, you couldn't do that. You could leave the red, but I don't think you should, because we have 501.9 that speaks to this as well. So we should adopt one of the greens. My recommendation would be that we go with the top choice rather than the second choice.
Top choice being referencing the 501.9.
Yes.
Do we want to make the change here, or do we make that at the board?
So I think you'd want to move that at the board table, right? That you'd want to accept that, the first suggested language with the reference to 501.9.
I'm happy to share those comments.
Sounds great.
Yeah, we can reiterate that at the meeting, so you guys don't have to. Yeah.
If you reiterate that, we'll be going over some
Yep.
things.
All right.
Thank you.
So we're tabling the advertising, and then the next meeting is September 24th, or maybe sooner. We're getting to that. Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.